and I will now pass the microphone to Kirk Astroff, who is a new ARARA board member, who will say a few words about ARARA and himself, and then introduce today's speaker.
Hi. Thanks, Peter. As Peter said, yeah, I'm a new incoming board member, just elected at the last conference here in Tucson, and really happy to be able to become part of the board of directors. I was really encouraged by people like Marglyph to get more involved in ARARA after being a member for many years. So looking forward to the opportunity to advance the rock art field. As you know, not only does ARARA have this annual meeting as well as this lecture series, but we have a number of committees that are staffed by volunteers just like you, and we need some of you to step forward and help out with some of those committees. We have quite a number of them. I don't know, about 8 committees. If you look on our website, you can see what those committees are and their responsibilities. And whether you have any experience or not serving on any committees, we really look forward to you stepping forward to volunteer with those committees. I'm pleased to be able to introduce Chris Loendorf, who's the Senior Project Manager for the Gila River Indian Community Cultural Resources Management Program, where he's worked for the last 20 years. The first rock art recording project that he was involved with was in 1981 in Petroglyph Canyon in Montana, and he has since completed a wide range of archaeological research from the Southwest to the Northern Plains. He moved to Arizona in 1989, and since then he has focused on the Sonoran Desert archaeology. Since coming to the Southwest, he has numerous publications, including over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles. He earned his PhD and MA at Arizona State University and his BA at the University of Montana. And so please help me welcome Chris Loendorf, who's going to be talking to us about the Gila River Indian Community Management Program. Chris.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, Kurt. I will bring up my PowerPoint here. Oops, like it's going. No, it doesn't want to advance. Let me just try that again. There we go. Okay. The Gila River Indian Community is located essentially at the heart of the ancestral territory of the Atom, who the Spanish referred to as the Pima. The territories along the Middle Gila River, along the south side of the Phoenix metropolitan area. The community is now home to the Akmalatam and the Peeposh, or Maricopa, who relocated to the area in the early 1800s. They were pushed from downstream locations into the community for defensive purposes. The core of the historic settlement area is between Gila and Pima Buttes on the south side of the Middle Gila. And that's the location that Euro-Americans first encountered the Atum, was essentially in that small area along the south side of the river, south of the Phoenix metropolitan area, basically due south of the Tempe Chandler area. So that's where the Atum were when the Spanish arrived in 1694, and that's where they are to this very day. Thought I'd tell you a little bit about our program. It started in 1993 as part of the Pima Maricopa irrigation project. We do all the archaeological work for the community. And in addition to large federal projects like PMIP, we do home sites data recovery and other, cell towers. Any of the cultural resource management work within the community is done by us. The major part of PMIP is over, but we still actively, in fact, we're doing data recovery yesterday. So we'll continue to work on whatever projects We have about 50 staff members, about half of whom are Native Americans. Many of our community member staff members now have over 20 years of experience doing data recovery excavations. So we have a diverse and experienced crew of archaeologists. Unlike a lot of Native American communities, we don't outsource our data recovery. We do all of the work ourselves with our own staff. For about the first decade of the existence of our program, most of the work was survey. We surveyed about, to date, about 160,000 acres, or not quite half of the reservation has been covered. However, we essentially, as you can see on the map, there are large upland areas in the Sierra Estrella along the eastern or western border of the community, and then the South Mountains, very small portions of the South Mountain ridges do extend into the community. Most of that's off of the reservation. Most of the Saskatoon Mountains are located along the southern edge of the community border, and then the Santan Mountains are located sort of towards the eastern edge of the community. And all of those upland areas have extensive varnished surfaces that are suitable for the preservation of rock art. But we don't have a tremendous amount of full coverage systematic survey. To date, we've documented over 1,600 sites, which is almost 20% of the area we've surveyed. And we have some level of documentation at about 50 rock art sites. There's quite a few more petroglyph sites within the community, but we only have a single pictograph within the community, and it appears to be a fairly recent figure. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data recovery work we did by way of explaining some of the evidence that I think provides continuity from the present to the past and into prehistory. It's, in my opinion, the same people who have been living there for a very long period of time. Prior to our work on PMIP, there hadn't been a lot of systematic archaeological research done. And so the community was really a bit of a gray area. There have been some investigations, but not large scale excavations like we conducted on for PMIP. Just going to use Lower Santan as an example, in part because our largest excavation sample is derived from this site. We had two corridors, one on either side of the highway there. This is the corridor that was designed for the flood protection. All of those areas that are filled with water are stripping units where we found architectural features and other features. So each of those locations is an area that there were clusters of houses. On the other side of the highway, you can see that canal there. We did the data recovery excavations for it before the canal was built. And here's an example of some of the work there. Just for reference to hopefully you can see my pointer there, that's a porta-john. Just to give you some sense of the scale, the area we excavated is over 1 kilometer long, and there are groups of houses that are interspersed with water catchments. We call them reservoir features. Each of the residential areas has reservoirs. The site is, we have over 2,600 features that we have excavated at this one site alone. We've also conducted very extensive excavations at Upper Santan, but much of the PMIP system follows existing canals. Virtually all of it follows existing canals that have been there for hundreds of years. And so for most of the PMIP data recovery, we predominantly found canal clean out and other canal and irrigation related features from about the last 1,000 years or so. This site is pretty indicative of the overall settlement patterns within the community. There's a small number of colonial period features around AD 600. Most of the features date to the sedentary period of between about 950 and 1150. And there's about a 4-to-1 ratio between classic period, or that 1150, 1250 to 1450 range. And there's far more features that date to the sedentary period. And it's like that across the entire reservation, and across the entire Middle Gila. The vast majority of the features date to the sedentary period, or about 950 to AD 1150. We also have done extensive excavations at historic period, quite a few kiek or traditional roundhouses. They're pit structures. They're comprised largely of wood. Here's an example of one that has a corn cob on the floor, and that's a jar filled with ochre there on the floor of the room. Here's another example of one of the kiek that we excavated, had about 20 vessels on the floor of it. These structures have a real mix of Euro-American, but also indigenous goods in them. Here's an example of a vato or a mata. We have a lot fewer of those features that we've excavated. This is at the same size as those previous two structures. And here's a cache from below the floor of that ramada. I believe these are vessels that were used in a saguaro wine ceremony, and they might have got a cache there because the Atum were becoming Christianized at this time, and the missionaries really discouraged the saguaro wine festival. So that might explain why that cache was there. We've also excavated quite a few adobe brick structures. These date to the late 1800s to the early 1900s. One of the unusual features that is more common to the south and probably originated there is there's hearths in the corner of the room. And this layout with two rooms with a doorway between is fairly common. The other far corner had this brick is vitrified from heat from a wood stove. Here's a adobe brick structure that had a cache below the floor. That's also a fairly common practice that we see in prehistory and history, where you'll find caches of items below the room floor. And one of the things that we found through our archaeological excavations are that there's discrepancies between what we find and what is been said based on historical documents. Many historians claim that wheat essentially changed the Atum society fundamentally. But like, for example, out of this burned structure, there wasn't a single grain of wheat in any of it. And instead, it's all the traditional Atum foods with burned corn kernels, squash seeds, tepary beans, and then also rye grass seeds, but no wheat whatsoever. Another important thing is that the Atum continued to do traditional crafts, including pottery making. They still do to this day. And one of the lines for evidence of continuity is that they practiced paddle and amble ceramic construction. There's two main ceramic techniques in the Southwest. The ancestral Puebloan or Hopi and Zuni in that area use a method called coil and scrape, whereas the Atum in the 1900s and historic period used paddle and anvil, which is also the technique that was used by the prehistoric folks, including in the sedentary period. So you have this continuity in traditions, continuity in foods, and other evidence that strongly suggests that it's the same people over the course of time. However, essentially nearly all archaeologists claim to this day that Hokan material culture ended at 1450. However, what they're talking about are adobe structures like Casa Grande and Salado polychromes. Buffwares and pit houses did not go away. So you have this situation where the Atum, the Aknal Atum, are similar to the pre-classic folks, but dissimilar to the classic period period folks. And I'm going to show you why I think that is. One of the unique things about the Phoenix Basin is that it's located at the confluence of many of the major streams in the Southwest, including the Gila River and Salt River, as well as Santa Cruz rivers. The confluence, not coincidentally, is all located, of all of those rivers, is located within the modern community. And the two streams, the Middle Gila and the Gila River, the entire Gila River has a very different watershed than does the Salt River. The Salt River is much more dependent upon winter rains, whereas the Gila River has a much larger component of monsoon rain, or summer rains are a much larger component of the flow in the Middle Gila. And there's evidence that suggests that the climate during the Holocene in the last 10,000 years has fluctuated between drier and wetter periods. And if those fluctuations also affected the winter rains or the monsoon rains, given the different watersheds, it would mean that good conditions for agriculture on the Salt River alternated with good conditions along the Middle Gila River. And I think there's ample evidence that that substantially affected the settlement patterns of the people who occupied the Phoenix Basin, which in turn affected their cultural practices. So there's considerable evidence. This is just one example for dramatic population loss along the Middle Gila. As I said, at the end of the sedentary period, there was a substantial decline. If you just look at classic or the public architecture as a proxy measure for the number of people that were there, the Middle Gila has over 30 pre-classic ball courts, but there's a small number of platform mounds in comparison. And so you have this and other lines of evidence. So basically you see a dramatic decrease in the amount of public architecture, which in turn implies or dramatic decrease, I mean to say, in public architecture along the Middle Gila in the Classic period, which by inference suggests a substantial population loss. So there's this evidence that shows that people moved both upstream along the Middle Gila to the Casa Grande area, which grew in size during the Classic period, but also a substantial component moved to the Lower Salt River, and sites like Pueblo Grande increased in size dramatically at almost essentially the same time that the Middle Gila populations, including Snaketown, decreased dramatically. So as I said, when Kino showed up, everybody had shifted to the Middle Gila River. And if you don't include that area when you're looking at the Phoenix Basin, it appears then that the entire basin was depopulated. However, the O'odham still used resources, and they considered the entire Phoenix Basin and beyond to be part of their territory. They just aggregated to the Middle Gila, and not just the Middle Gila, but a small area compared to where they used to live, again, between Gila and Pima Buttes on the south side of the river. And they aggregated there for defensive purposes. Apache raiding had major impacts on settlement patterns throughout the historic period. They pushed O'odham populations from the San Pedro rivers in southeastern Arizona, and part of those folks relocated to the Middle Gila. And folks also moved from, as I said, downstream, the Peeposh moved there. So the historic period farming populations, the O'odham and Peeposh and others, aggregated in this relatively small area. And if you aren't looking at that area, the rest of the landscape can appear to be depopulated. And all of that area is in the modern community where, as I just explained, there wasn't much archaeological research done until PMIP. So I believe this explains why the pre-classic folks and the historic periods are for historic period populations are so similar, because the population was again concentrated on the Middle Gila, and you see this more southern influence, more southern traditions, cremation continued, and other practices that are typify the pre-classic period continued in the Tucson Basin. And so what you see is a resurgence of these traditions from the South in the historic period. And I am going to get to rock art here. I know it took me a few slides, but I wanted to cover some of that background and the evidence for continuity over time in occupation. And it's one of the regions in the Southwest that does have continuity of farming populations. Much of what we know about the rock art is based on conservation work. The BIA has generously provided grant funding. Gary Cantley has been instrumental in helping us. He's recently retired, unfortunately, but as a result of grant monies that he helped us acquire, we've been able to complete graffiti removal and other mitigation factors at rock art sites throughout the community. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of vandalism of rock art in the community. As I said, the metropolitan area borders much of the community, and there's a lot of illegal camping and other trespassing that goes on. Unfortunately, in this picture is only about 20 years old. Somebody came in with a bulldozer and stole some petroglyph folders from this site relatively recently. There's a lot of incised names, a lot of other sorts of graffiti, but it's predominantly spray painted or tagging that we contend with. And many of you, no doubt, are aware of the solvents elephant snot and shadow max. We've been using them for the last several years to clean rock art sites and had great success. Here's one of the examples of a rock art site that's been cleaned. And if you'll notice, I'm not saying locations of these rock art sites, and our Tribal Historic Preservation Office is very concerned about the disclosing location of the sites because of the issues that have been had with graffiti and other vandalism, defacing, the theft of panels, the theft of boulders. So I'm intentionally not showing locations, but this is one of the examples of the severely defaced panel. And I actually didn't know that that bighorn sheep petroglyph was there until after we cleaned that panel. So we've had good results with spray paints, but not good results with latex paint. And unfortunately, one of the most popular targets for some strange reasons is shooting cans of paint. A lot of this is not on rock art, but quite a bit of it is, unfortunately. The paint splatters all over the place. It makes a rather messy, permanent disturbance to the panels. And the elephant snot just doesn't effectively clean it. It tends to smear instead of effectively removing the latex paints. And again, unfortunately, we have quite a bit of latex. But we found, as the manufacturer recommends, that heated pressure washer will effectively clean the latex paints. However, it is quite dangerous. You can remove the varnish, you can remove the paint, you can remove the varnish, you can remove the rock, you can basically take it down to bare rock with the pressure washer. We got a gas-powered pressure washer with a water tank. But we find that using as high a temperature as we can with as low a pressure does effectively clean latex paints. And it was one of the final pieces in our arsenal to be able to effectively clean some of the most difficult and heavily vandalized areas. We have worked throughout the community in all of the locations that we know that there's been any vandalism to rock art sites. And we have conducted reconnaissance excavation or basically driving around looking for rock art, reconnaissance, looking for sites throughout essentially the entire reservation. We also got a lot of help from the wildland firefighters. If you have to clean up rock art anywhere, they're great friends to have. They have lots of water, and they pitched in and helped clean. And we made it through sites that I thought were going to take a month in a week through their help. And water has proved to be one of the biggest challenges, being able to carry sufficient water. And again, fire trucks are great for that. So I am happy to say that by 2019, we cleaned every single rock art panel throughout the entire reservation that we knew had any spray paint or other vandalism on it. We also disperse campfire rings, and we've cleaned trash from all the sites in order to discourage further illegal camping. People go up into some of these remote areas to party. And so we've cleaned them up, and we've, again, cleaned all of the known disturbances from rock art sites within the community. However, since then, there's been, that's the one spray painted panel that we have identified. People have, we put up warning signs as well. We don't actually place the signs at the sites. We place them on the periphery or outside the areas as to not draw attention to them. Some of those signs have been defaced. Quite a few of them have been shot. And we've also had people come in and build campfire rings for camping. Down there at the bottom, someone's asking someone to go to prom, apparently. And so there's that and other kinds. A lot of trash dumping is another major factor that still unfortunately occurs throughout the community. But we, on at least a yearly basis, in some areas more often, have been going out and inspecting areas for damage. And we work as quickly as possible to clean any spray paint. We did have some issues during COVID, unfortunately. People were out running around. Somebody drove through the ball court at Snaketown, got stuck, rutted it up. And so there's, in addition to damage to rock art, we've had issues with people, coming onto the reservation and camping and doing other illegal activities. One of the ways that we have dealt with that is since 2015, we've maintained monitoring cameras at a number of the most sensitive sites on the reservation. We've used the cameras to document patterns of trespass. One of the districts within the community was concerned about people coming in, and so they asked us to do an investigation, and we placed cameras in various locations, and we're able to document patterns of use and areas that were being where most of the trespassing was occurring. And for the last few years, we've used cameras that are powered by solar cells and that transmit pictures essentially right away. Sometimes there's a short delay. They transmit pictures over the cellular network. So you can log on your phone and see who's been out there at that rock art site. And we also use inoperable cameras as a deterrent. We put them in areas that we're more concerned about vandalism, and in order to let people know that they're being watched. And so we use a combination of the actual cameras and then the dummy cameras as both a deterrent, and then also in order to document patterns of use within the community for the rock art sites. One of the things that I find most interesting are the wildlife photos, but they're more than just nice pictures of animals. They also, turns out that some areas that we thought there was trespass, we got a lot of animal photos, and in general, locations that there isn't a lot of human activity. We photographed a lot of animals. a number of these pictures down here across the bottom, and then this bobcat at the upper right are all from a location. Somebody put up signs there saying it was Rattlesnake Pass. And so we thought that, and the trail looked heavily used. So we thought that there were a lot of people coming through that area, but we didn't photograph a single person. Instead, we got bobcat out in the daylight and other wildlife. So they're actually a useful indicator of areas that aren't getting a lot of human activity. We've also, we photograph a lot of coyotes. There's wild horses on the community, another bobcat here. I'm pretty sure this is a bat in the lower left. There's the largest mule deer. In fact, I've only seen 2 mule deer in the entire 23 years I've been working there. There are not many deer anywhere near the reservation, but there are some of the more remote areas that there are some deer. And again, we've documented those through the use of our cameras. So again, we try to keep right on top of any fresh paint and get out there and clean it as quickly as possible. We replace you can see the sign's been shot up there. We replace those as quickly as we can, just so people know that we're actively monitoring this. It sends them a message that someone's there, someone's watching, and it's not just a sign that's been put up and forgotten. The final piece of our arsenal was bee suits. The water attracts bees when you're trying to clean petroglyphs, and so it was a major issue. But we also had a number of spray painted areas on petroglyph panels that were in close proximity to beehives that we were previously unable to clean. But with the acquisition of something you might not think of at first, bee suits, we were able to sort of clean some of the last remaining spray painted areas. So we also have a Bruker Tracer XRF, and we've done some rock art research with the EDXRF spectrometer. We done a couple of projects off the reservation, including in Texas and Nevada as well with pictographs, and done some work on documenting paint types and other research with petroglyphs on the reservation as well. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sites themselves. This is a photograph of a petroglyph there on the lower right that the community's members identify as a scorpion. And that gentleman there is a community member who's harvesting saguaro fruit with saguaro ribs. They take 2 saguaro ribs and attach them together and then use it to pull down the fruit from the saguaros. And a number of the rock art sites have quite a few saguaros in the vicinity of them. There are still many connections between community members and rock art. You see similarities in design and similarities in tradition, including these pipe type figures on basketry, and then here in rock art. And this is actually our office building, so maybe that one's not quite fair, but it's similar design inspired by prehistory. And also call your attention to, if any of you haven't seen it, if you go onto YouTube and type in an Indian Bible, you'll get this film from the 1930s that's horribly racist and horribly dated, but it does describe some of the underlying beliefs that are still there and maintained by the community members. Here's a rawhide shield in the lower right and the same symbol in rock art. So many of the rock art sites are considered to be traditional cultural properties of the O'odham. And for example, this is Elder Brothers Chair in South Mountain, and the crew's up there working on cleaning the rock feature itself. You can see that there's petroglyphs in close association with it. And many of these TCPs, the TCP itself is actually the rock formation, not the petroglyphs. And so this is actually the altar that's, or the feature that's depicted in the film An Indian Bible, this is that site. And there's numerous petroglyphs in the vicinity, but the important feature itself is this large boulder that's detached from the main part of the talus slope. And that's another common feature for these important traditional cultural properties, is they're large boulders that have step shapes, and they're separated from the main part of the talus slope. This is another example of a large boulder that's detached from is sort of separated from the rest of the large boulders in the area. And again, it has that step shape across it, and it has a number of unusually large petroglyphs, and I'm going to show you some more examples of those. The Gila style, or prehistoric rock art, that has been defined, the type that's been defined for the Hohokam, or the prehistoric folks in the Phoenix Basin, is generally thought to consist of smaller figures, but within the community, there's a number of sites that have sort of atypically large features, or petroglyphs as well, including on this boulder, this very large hand that's visible from a long distance away. Its position, and that's generally the case too. Most of these sites are in locations along trails or other areas where they're visible from a distance, and I think they were meant to be that way. Quite a few of the TCPs with associated rock art, and it might be a little bit hard to see on here, but here's a circular petroglyph on this boulder that has a very large bedrock mortar in it. And I think a lot of these features probably date to the Archaic period, or so 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And to me, this just indicates the importance of the continuity of these locations to the community. And there are still specific stories, traditions associated with these sites. For example, this is Elder Brothers footprints. I would call it 2 bedrock matatis. But the community members have a tradition with, this is where Elder Brother landed after a battle when he was fell down from the sky. And again, there's petroglyphs in direct association with this traditional cultural property. People also commonly still leave offerings at many of these TCPs. And so they're active parts of their lives to this day. They're continuing these traditions and continuing to come to these sites and pray and do other traditional religious activities at them and leave offerings. And for example, this site is a location where a traditional healer in the community still conducts ceremonies, and the patient walks through this crack here and around out through the outside. This is the end of that rock with all these petroglyphs. This boulder's probably about 20 meters away. Another thing I'll draw your attention to is all the rocks have been left as offerings all around this. So that's another common feature. Again, there's still people actively leaving offerings at these sites and actively using them for traditional ceremonies, such as this healing ceremony that's performed at this site. And, you know, one of the most important things is that petroglyph sites are considered to be very powerful places and therefore dangerous. And like, for example, the Bighorn Sheep Shrine is so dangerous that people won't show their children where it's located for fear that they'll go there. And if you disturb the site, you can cause, it's thought that you can cause severe weather. And so that's another reason that these sites are sensitive, and the Tribal Historic Preservation Office doesn't want their locations broadly disseminated. It's because they believe it could cause disruption, because these are very powerful places. And so the Atum will say a prayer before they get there to the site and explain why they're visiting, explain what they're doing to the Creator. And it's all part of that continuing tradition and the continued importance, the continued power, the continued strength of these locations in people's belief systems. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of the Gila style is characterized by much smaller petroglyphs, but the community in several different places, there's including very large figures, including this nearly life-sized anthropomorph, and several very large quadrupeds at this panel as well. Here's other examples of atypically elaborate and large petroglyphs, including this pipette here, which is almost 2 meters long, and other figures. So there's a variety of sites that are have unusually large and elaborate petroglyphs at them. There's also considerable evidence for the longevity of these sites, including variation in the varnish on the petroglyph panels and repecking. I actually have to admit, and I think I showed this same slide at the ARARA conference, I didn't notice the repecking until my dad pointed it out, so I have to give him credit for that. But if you look at these sheep on the panel on the left, virtually every one of them has been repecked in different parts of it. And on the panel on the right, you can see obvious variation in the varnishing. We do not have fully revarnished petroglyphs. There are not petroglyphs that are obviously archaic age within the community. There is evidence, solid evidence for considerable human presence along the Middle Gila from about at least 5,000 years ago, almost for certain earlier than that, but we have solid evidence for use, including projectile points and other archaeological data from the Middle Archaic on, so about from 5,000 years ago. Most all the rock art within the community appears much more likely to date to the sedentary period. And again, that corresponds with the time period at which the population was by far the largest along the Middle Gila. And I think that's at least part of the reason why that's when a lot of the rock art peaked. There's another thing that you find are that the historic petroglyphs, obviously historic petroglyphs, and prehistoric petroglyphs occur in the same locations. There's the west side of the boulder and the east side of the same boulder. And so that's, again, evidence for continuity in use and continuity in traditions. The rock art is not randomly distributed across the community. There's large areas that have suitable petroglyph panels, but it's pretty concentrated. There are some scattered panels in areas, but the rock art tends to occur in the exact same areas. And again, these large detached rocks such as this are real magnets for rock art. And virtually all of the petroglyphs at this site, for example, are at this, many of them anywhere on this boulder here. So there hasn't actually been a lot of, there has been some research, Aaron Wright and others, and Todd Bostwick obviously have researched the petroglyphs in the Phoenix Basin area, but not on the Gila River. One of the most well-known design elements are the pipettes. It's been suggested that these are Tlaloc or a Mesoamerican god. I don't think there's much evidence to support that. And a lot of the research that has been done is looking for symbols elsewhere, such as horned serpents and stuff like similar imagery like that. But for the most part, there hasn't been as much research done on the unique features, the unique design elements of the Phoenix Basin, and pipettes being one of the best examples. So the example I'm going to use is the same example that in terms of a unique design element, it's the same one I just used at the ARARA conference. And it's these figures here, like this one on the lower left, that have, whoops, went too far. One arm up and one arm down. And so both arms up or both arms down, which are also on this slide, are much more common. You can find the anthropomorphs like that pretty much anywhere in the Western North America, but having one arm up and one arm down is not as common. And particularly the triangular shape with one arm in a triangular shape and the other arm up is not a common element at all. I will point out again, for anybody who didn't see my ARARA presentation, this is reconstruction. If you'll notice, there's a petroglyph hiding behind these guys here. It's actually this one down here in the lower right. That petroglyph is right there. These guys are posing at one of the petroglyph sites. Those are all staff members that are community members. They're all autumn. And the figure was done by Rob Chacho. And the shields themselves are actually the shields that were collected from the community. Those are photographs. He's stitched this all together using Photoshop. And the bows they're holding, the clubs they're holding, are all the actual artifacts that were collected from the community. So now here's another historical example. You see that one arm up, one arm down. And again, that triangular shape that's not common elsewhere, but you see throughout the community along the middle of Gila. And part of the reason I picked this particular symbol is because there is no doubt whatsoever that this particular petroglyph is less than 20 years old. People from the community who live in that area hiked there 30 years ago and it wasn't there. You can see these rocks aren't, they have no solder whatsoever, and they're definitely done within the last 20 years. And so again, it's definitely recent, definitely modern, and yet you see this same unusual stylistic tradition of the one arm up, one arm down at this site. And community members also continue to, in addition to sort of these rock alignment geoglyphs, they continue to maintain, this is a well-known geoglyph that's called Hook. And it's associated with an autumn tradition. Hook is essentially a deformed woman who eats babies, sort of like a boogeyman type figure. And this particular geoglyph is associated with that tradition. And if you look at aerial photographs in the 1930s, that head and those cairns that are there were not there. Those have been added, and the cairns have all been maintained. The figures have been cleaned. People continue to leave offerings at this site, but it raises a serious question about, is this sort of the ongoing, the maintenance of ongoing traditions, or are you impacting significant cultural properties? And it's a debate in the community, not one that I can answer. And I can see both sides to it. I can see why people want to continue their traditions. But as an archaeologist, yes, there's issues with altering and changing, figures that are hundreds of years old or older. And so it's a real issue within the community that's a source of some considerable debate and discussion. So I'd like to acknowledge Teresa Rodriguez, who has overseen the petroglyph conservation work, and she was also the person who organized the help of the firefighters, and we would not have gotten nearly as far, nearly as quickly as we did without their help. And also, again, special thanks to Gary Cantley for his assistance in getting funding for us to do our conservation and documentation work. And I think I left plenty of time for any questions or comments. So I'll stop my share here.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris.
Certainly.
So yeah, anybody who wants to make a question or a comment, please do use the chat and we will deal with that. So actually we have one question so far, which is whether you've found any bell rocks at any of these sites. Ringing rocks, right?
Right, yeah. The short answer is I don't know. We haven't looked for them. I am aware, and I've been to Kokoraki Butte and seen what Janine Hernbrode and has done there, and it's just not something that we've taken mallets out and attempted to see if they ring. I suspect there are bell rocks, but I can't tell you. Moving forward, we will, that's something we will be looking for, but we haven't identified any to date.
Now you mentioned that one arm up and one arm like a kimbo, I guess is probably
Yeah, or like a dancing move.
yeah. Now is that significant because that's a more recent figure or just uncommon one in general?
Well, in my opinion, it's not as common to have anthropomorphs in that figure. And the reason I picked it, not because it's particularly significant, but because I have examples that I'm positive are less than 20 years old. And so there's quite a few petroglyphs out there that are done in traditional styles like spirals and other sorts of traditional figures that don't appear to be revarnished. But it's harder to know for 100% certain that that thing's not 300 or 500 or 600 years old, because the vagaries of revarnishing are, again, it's also hard to depict that. So, I mean, there's some examples where obviously on the same panel, there's differences in patination, but with that geoglyph, there's, again, no doubt that it's recent. And then there's also, again, the historical example, that site with the anthropomorph that's got the triangle shape that I showed with the one arm up, is the dates on that are in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And there's a horse there with a spiral in it. So again, also pretty unequivocal evidence for older historic, and it's the same figure. So you can tie that from prehistoric designs up through historical designs to modern.
Yeah, we have that same figure out here in New England, actually. People think it's probably on the order of 1,000 years old that it came in, it was being used. Now, whether it has anything of the same interpretation or not, I wouldn't know. I mean,
Yeah.
Maybe it was more universal, but I don't know. Is there an interpretation that's applied to that out there?
Not that I know. I mean, again, other than people have suggested it's a dancing figure, but there are also rock art depictions on ceramics as well. And oftentimes with anthropomorphs in a line or next to one another, so presumably dancing.
Yeah.
And that's what I've generally heard it associated with are dancing figures.
Yeah, I think it's been suggested with the Ojibwa use of it that it might be, with the one hand up as an offering gesture.
Yeah, it's not entirely unique to the community, but it's not something you see. It's not super common, as common as the two hands up or two hands down.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about similarities between some basketry and rock art.
Uh-huh.
So there was a question whether there are ceramic designs similar to the rock art imagery.
Yes. And a lot of the exact same design elements, spirals, are common on pottery. In fact, the most common motifs on the historic period buffwares are spirals. And so there's dissimilarities and similarities between the rock art and the ceramic designs. And those continue through time as well.
Okay, so I see Darlene has her hand up. Shall I let her just go? Why don't we just ask directly if you'd like to do that? So if you want to try unmuting Darlene, if you have a question.
Yes, Chris, I was just wondering, you had mentioned using heat for removing acrylic paints. So I was wondering, were you using a steam cleaner or what exactly you could use for that?
Yeah, we actually purchased a $8,000, again, thanks to our grant money, trailer mounted pressure washer, and it's got a heater, uses diesel oil to heat the water up. You can go up to about 180 degrees, and it's got a fairly large gasoline powered motor. It goes up to like over 4,000 PSI. And so that pressure washer, again, was really essential for getting those latex paints off, because we also have gasoline powered cart mounted pressure washers, but they don't work as well. And because the pressure is what tends to cause the damage, particularly along any cracks that are in the panel, it'll tend to flake the rock along those cracks. So we use as narrow a nozzle as possible with the lowest pressure, preferably 1,000 PSI or lower, and then the highest temperature. So we're using something like about 160-degree water at 1,000 PSI, and then a narrow nozzle to remove the latex paints. We've also done fairly extensive testing, safety testing. We went out and collected rocks from road cuts that had varnish on them and then painted on them. That was what that picture showed. And experimented with different rock types, welded tough and granodiorites, some of the other materials that are, because they behave a little bit differently from one another. Some of them can take a little bit more vigorous cleaning than others. And so every time we go to clean a site, we'll pick an area that doesn't have any petroglyphs and start working in that area. And again, we've done a lot of testing to ensure that we're as safely removing this stuff as possible.
Yes, I bet so. I was just wondering because it seems like the heat does help remove acrylic paints. So.
Well, for sure. There's no doubt it's a huge difference. And in fact, it's easier to clean the petroglyphs in Arizona in the summer for the same reason. And but a lot of the work we've done is during the winter, and it's harder to clean with out the heated water. It's especially more difficult during the winter.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thanks, Darlene. So I did have a couple questions regarding sort of the local community. So one is, does the community have a museum where one can visit and view their cultural heritage?
Yes, the tribe has the Hugam Heritage Center. It's located south of the Wild Horse Pass Casino. And they have kind of a funky schedule. They're still kind of recovering from COVID, as so many of us are, but they are back open again. And they have a little bit longer hours than they used to. And they have some brand new displays as well. So that's the place to, within the Gila River Indian community. I didn't mention the Salt River Indian community, which is located to the north, just east of Scottsdale in the Phoenix metropolitan area. That's a group of Akmalatam and Peeposh who relocated from the Middle Gila in the 1870s. They also have a visitor center and a little museum there as well that talks about O'odham history. And there's also the Tohono O'odham have a similar community museum in Sells, Arizona. So there's the four southern tribes, the Tohono O'odham, Akmalatam, the Ankh Akmalatam or Salt River community, and then the Akchin River Indian community. Three of those four have visitor centers that are open to the public.
Yeah, so these new features that are showing up, are they sort of part of a revival of traditional culture, or how are they perceived?
I would say they're a continuation of traditional culture. I don't think there was ever a complete break in traditions. Obviously, missionaries and the US government did everything they could to destroy and alter and change O'odham culture. It was part of US government policy, as I'm sure you all know. And despite that fact, many of these traditions have been continued. There was a period of time where it essentially went underground, but things like the creation story have been taught one generation to the next. Our Barnaby Lewis, who was our tribal historic preservation officer, learned of the O'odham traditions through those oral stories. And so it never entirely went away. But yes, there has been in recent years a resurgence of some of these things. You could question how much continuity, or if people are sort of, I certainly wouldn't question that, but I think many people would, whether or not these are newly invented things or an actual continuation. It's probably a little bit of both. There are some clearly recent additions like sweat lodges. The school next door to us has a sweat lodge where I work, and that's definitely not an Optum tradition. There was someone on the West End who was leading vision quests, and that's not an Optum tradition either. He actually wasn't a community member. And so there's a little bit of both, but there's, in my opinion, definite evidence for continuity through time.
Yeah, I mean, given that they've been on this land for a long time, I guess all the creation stories can still be attached to the creation places.
Yes. Yeah, and in fact, that's part of what I did in my dissertation work is tie in our 2017 American Antiquity article that I did with Barnaby talks about that, talks about the relationship between the archaeological record and then the Ottoman traditions. And in my opinion, there's far too many similarities for it to be coincidental. And you can actually essentially correlate events in the story to archaeological data.
Yeah. So are sites connected to songs, or songs connected to sites?
Yes, and that's actually something I didn't get into. The song series are associated with landscape features. So, for example, Blackwater Lake, which is on the eastern part of the community, is associated with a song series called the Oreo songs, and it's believed that a man, the lake was thought to be so deep that it was connected to the ocean, and it was so deep that you couldn't dive to the bottom of it. And there was a kid who fell into the lake, and a man dove in, tied a rope around himself and dove in after the kid, and he lost consciousness. And as they were pulling him up, he had this series of songs come to him, and those songs describe a movement on the landscape, and their specific songs are associated with specific locations like Casa Grande ruins. There's a number of different songs that specifically discuss and describe events there, as does the Ottoman creation story. There's particular stories related to the Sivan, or the ruler of Casa Grande, and other events and various conflicts and other things. So there's actual descriptions of events that occurred at these sites in those traditions.
Wow. It's kind of like the Incas, where they would make up songs to commemorate various battles and things that the Inca did.
Yep.
So the Hohokam were doing a very similar thing.
Yep, that's for sure.
Okay, another question. What outreach methods have been used to help increase local sensitivity and respect for the rock art?
I cannot say. We, for the most part, the issues are not within the community. Some of the tagging and some of the other disturbance has definitely been done by community members, but I think it's, for the most part, because they didn't know. I don't think a lot of people even realize that there are petroglyphs there. And since we put up sort of warning signs, and we regularly visit schools and talk about archaeology within the community and the sensitivity of the rock art and other sites, that's the primary means that we've used to sort of do outreach within the community. I can't say as we've done much off of the reservation, but what we have done is make sure that we use two types of signs. One are like a warning that it's a sensitive cultural site, and the others are no trespassing signs, because you can't go into the backcountry anywhere on the community without trespassing. And so people tear down the signs, we put them back up. And then we've, again, the rangers respond. We notify them every time we photograph somebody. We send them an email notification, and they have altered their patrol patterns and have, again, we've identified locations that are people who are coming in, and we give them, it's not real time, but it's close to, immediate feedback. Somebody's camping, in this location or whatever it is. And then the rangers go out there and we'll find and potentially confiscate your vehicle. So that's, I think probably one of our most effective tools is to, sort of, continue to watch the sites. And then again, with the help of the police.
That's good. Good. They're taking it seriously. There's a question regarding the trails and songs that we were talking about earlier. Is there a salt trail and related song?
No. The salt journey is more associated with the tonal autumn to the south than it is the acmal autumn. There are well-known trails. In fact, my background here is the Kawaki Trail. That's Phoenix behind me. And that's through the Estrella Mountains where Kino passed when he was going west to California. He crossed over the mountains through that trail. And there's petroglyphs all along it. So there's not any trail that's specifically associated with the salt journey within the community.
Okay, a couple of questions about different groups. So one, can you clarify the difference between Hohokam and Hugam?
They're different spellings of the same word, essentially. Hohokam has been translated as, you'll see it commonly translated as all used up or all dried up, but that's not what the word means in the context that the O'odham are using it. And people like Barnaby would pronounce it Hugam as opposed to Hohokam. And what the word actually means in the context in which they're using it is it's the word that's used for deceased ancestors. And so that word means their ancestors who have gone before them. But archaeologists have both changed the spelling and then also changed it into this other description of material culture. But again, you have to remember, Hohokam is not one material culture, it's two material cultures. It's pre-classic with buff wares and pit houses, and then classic period with stiletto polychromes and adobe architecture. So it's only the classic period of material culture that ends at 1450. The pre-classic material culture does not end. There are buff wares galore, and people were living in pit houses when Kino showed up in 1694. But because of that architectural difference, people assumed that it had to be a different group of people. But it's actually, people like Howery and others recognize that continuity early on. And that's why they explain the classic period as being these migrants that came in and then somehow disappeared. But I'm getting further from the rock art theme here into sort of a relationship. But again, there is no doubt that the historic period were doing the exact same material culture as the pre-classic Hohokam.
So one other question, what if the Maricopa Peeposh, they also create rock art?
The short answer is yes, and I don't know as much about the distinctions. Aaron Wright is much better versed in that than I am, and he's been working on the Lower Gila, and I'm aware of some glyphs that have been suggested to be more specific to them, and I'm not aware of particular examples within the community. They may be there, but I'm not aware of them. And there are some ceramics and lower Colorado buff wares or Lower Gila buff wares and other ceramics that occasionally show up. But again, the archaeological and historical evidence suggests that the Peeposh are recent migrants. So they've only been there since the early 1800s. So you're comparing that to a much, much longer record of habitation for the O'odham in the Phoenix Basin.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that may wrap up our questions. So I'd like to thank you once again, Chris, for your presentation. Thanks again to the attendees for your interest. Obviously, if you'd like to learn more about ARARA or get involved, we do encourage people to get involved. Please check out our website and our Facebook pages. We invite everyone to renew or join our membership to support the study and conservation of rock art. So until next time, everybody, stay safe.
Thank you.